think you guys really applied that. The philosopher is Alfred North Whitehead. So I want to thank you both for telling us that, or forcing us to meet the limits of our own imagination and to understand that there's always other possibilities of attachment. So Ali, perhaps you want to join us on stage? Okay, so I would like to open the questions to the floor. Anybody has a question? You're doing the...
Well, maybe before that, I have a question. I love all of the work, all of it. And I think what is so interesting is, of course, also the focus on observation and on the observer and on the position of the observer within all of that. But I think we were talking briefly before we came here about the role of observation. And I was hoping you could just tell us a little bit more about that within your practice and the larger body of work.
That's it. Thank you. See, where is it? Okay, it's okay. Well, I think for me, there's the idea of observation as a process to embody the knowledge is more important than the data itself. Because working now that I was looking at your presentation and this amazing project, I remember the project we were talking about also of the La Carte du Ciel, that it was a project of 19 telescopes all around the world to create the first astrophotography atlas of the world, no? Of the celestial dome. And I have been working with that archive also and that telescope. And what gives me is like the need to have the experience, to look at the telescope, to what you earn from that observation is completely different than receiving only the data and the images. No, I feel like astronomy, in this case, talking about astronomy, has and astronomy and meteorology, for example, are two professions that move away from poetry and aesthetics. And in some point, they were mainly that part of the feeling, no? So I really think observation, we still need observation. And I don't know if I answer.
Yeah. Actually, but I would also argue that the interesting thing about when we interrogate this idea that we all have of data with a big D, you know, I think it's, if you deconstruct that, so a lot of artists who actually work with data, like one of the interesting things is, you know, people talk about playing with data. People talk about, the idea that data is actually playful, the data can be also it is deeply subjective, it is deeply open to bias and all of that. And then actually it makes it possible for us to also engage with it and then make it whatever we, you know, decide it's going to be. Yeah, but I agree.
So, and observation is also subjective always. No?
Anybody in the audience would, yes.
Fantastic. Both of your bodies of work are incredible, and I'm completely inspired at the moment. What inspires me the most is that the work happens regardless of the audience. It happens regardless of in your case, you know, the unknowing audience that looks up and sees something happen. You know, the side effects are what they are, but at the end of the day, it's about making a statement that reaffirms, again, the question of observation, of looking up in a different way, of contemplating one's own relationship to the space above or the sky, or where the sky ends and starts. And in your case, this engagement with data, that you know the data comes from people, but whether they're going to read it in the same way again is a completely different question. And then the poetry by which it's presented back at the audience that is unknowing of the family history within the observatory, etc. I mean, there's something so beautiful about the processes that you're going through as artists, revealing something that is void of necessarily the viewer at the end of the day. And I think I'd be very interested to hear your personal relationship to the receptive audience afterwards, because I don't think the art world, the science world is necessarily important in this case. There's something else that's really important. And I'm just feeling something, but I'm not quite sure how to articulate it. I'm curious, how do you engage with your audience in relation to your work and the research that you're doing, where process is actually more important in this case than the outcome? And your videos are fantastic and beautiful, but I can see the journey you've been on is so much deeper, and we won't ever be able to access that. So I'd love you to just reflect on that a little bit.
That's a great question. I think there are many different lives to all the work. I think there are many different lives to the work, to the research, and there are different forms that, different things take. So there are sound works where I think actually audience participation is a very big part of it, because one of the things that a lot of my work is trying to do is exactly what you said, which is making a case for wonder. I feel like the word has lost currency a little bit. And also there's a lovely text by a historian of science, Lorraine Daston, who talks about how wonder had a lot more teeth. Wonder walks a line with the horrible, with the fearful. And that's the kind of line that I'm interested in exploring with a lot of the work. But I think actually, audience is very important, but I agree. I mean, I think, for instance, if there is working with observatories, the work is always shared afterwards. What people read into the work is, of course, an entirely different element. But yeah, I think I would say that there are many different forms that all the research takes. Some is writing, some is film, but it is important, yeah, because there's a sort of strange sort of letting it go, right? And it has to live its own life. Yeah.
Yeah. When as an artist, you're working with projects that are art and science, no? Sometimes it's like you have to inform science as an artist, and I try to do the opposite. Like, I hate informing about science. No, I don't want to make like divulgation of science. And for example, for my last exhibition, instead of having, because always the museum, like they have these programs and they want you to give a visit or this kind of guided tour that I really don't like, because I don't want to tell people what they have to see. So instead of doing that, what I did, and it actually, I enjoy it very much. I invite people to give the guided tour, but I invited a philosopher, a scientist, a specialist in myth, in mythology, a storyteller for kids, and I saw a different exhibition every time. And for me, when I'm creating or where I'm in a project, like for example, in this project I'm now involved in the 5th of April, I'm really looking forward to see the work, like even if it's mine, like I feel like I'm the first public, no? It's like I really want to see it. And I want to have this dialogue through this kind of language that is completely different, that if I can express it in words, for me it's not art. No.
I think you've just confirmed that the sensitivity that you have in relation to your subject and your process extends into the relationship to the audience. So thank you.
Thank you.
If there is anybody else who has a question, but perhaps I would follow up. So I think one of the things that is very interesting with what you just said is that you don't own the meaning of what you create to a certain extent. And so I have a double question for you. First, when do you know that an artwork is finished? Because this must be very difficult to understand if, like as an artist, do you have like some sort of limits for that? And also like in any of your artworks, did you come to being very transformed yourself? But, like, did you have this moment of like, oh my God, I'm falling, I'm falling down, or I'm losing the ground or something? My own work is bringing me in a place where I don't want to go, or I don't know.
Oh. Wow, that's usually it's deadlines which decide when the work is done. Because I could just keep working on something and I would it's never done. You know what I mean? Like I can always keep editing. I can always keep drawing. I'm trying to think of a work that, I think, I did a piece which was called Atmospheres, which was from, it was set in an observatory, but it was with the first time I used a fisheye lens, and I had pointed the lens up, and the observatory is in the south of India, and it's got an very old-fashioned, not old-fashioned, it's got a historical decameter radio telescope array. So what happens with the fisheye lens is when you look at the footage, because I just shot just like that, just to see what would happen, it ends up, you basically see the dome of the earth, right? But you see it from your perspective on the ground. So it's like another way of looking at the blue marble, but from our perspective on the ground. And then with the telescopes, it is bisected and trisected. So it's a really strange image. And I think that became something really interesting, because it made me think about the image, which of course we have referenced a lot, the blue marble, and the fact that the image itself has a really interesting history. So the first image was, I think, 1972, when it was taken by the crew of Apollo. And then NASA in 2012 released another blue marble image, but this one was shot by satellite, I think from 900, I forget the distance, but it was not far enough away to be able to see the entire planet as a sphere, right? So it's a digital construct of many images. And there's a fabulous book by Nicholas Merskov called How to See the World, where he talks about how that image becomes a really interesting metaphor, right? Because we construct the world like that with bits and pieces that we stitch together, and then we think it's real until we know it's not. Do you know what I mean? So that work for me has sort of changed. Yes.
I agree. Time is the one that decides when a piece is finished, and usually one ends and starts another one. No, so it's kind of following. And yes, there are pieces that have affect how I perceive not only the world around me, but also myself. And to give one example that I never tried again, and I recommend not to do it at home, no? And it's a project I did with hypnosis. And in that project, I did, instead of a regression, I did a projection to the future. And I found both. So it was like really, it took me like about a year to recover.
Oh my God, we could have a whole conversation about
that. A whole conversation about that, yes. Wow. And my research on time has been has confronted me with yes, the concept of time.
Thanks for sharing that. Rob?
Hi, I have a slightly light-hearted question. Both really great presentations. Rohini, you're a self-confessed eclipse chaser, and you also work with eclipses. Tell me, what was your best eclipse?
Yeah, the next one.
So it's the one I never saw. So I've chased 3 annular solar eclipses successfully. But the project, actually the eclipse that changed everything was 2010, July 22nd, when it was the longest eclipse, so they said, of the century. It was 6 minutes and 40 seconds of totality, which is insane, right? Like most eclipses are, it was over Patna, Bihar. The path was directly over Patna in Bihar. And I made a visit, and I went there with the group of amateur astronomers when we were on the Patna dome, and we're waiting, and it's an early morning eclipse. And of course, at 3 o'clock, the clouds, I have a whole relationship with clouds. So anyway, that's another story. But the clouds came in, and at the moment of totality, it was completely occluded. It started to rain. But the energy on the roof, like there's either screaming or crying. There's no middle ground during a total solar eclipse. And it was just, there was that moment when you're suddenly aware of your position on the planet as an actor in space, which is very hard to describe. And that's the moment I decided there's something here that we could think about. And I started the project and I applied for a grant to start interviewing amateur astronomers. So the one I never saw is the one.
Well, that's great, because the only one I've seen has been in cloud, and it was in the middle of the English Channel on a boat.
Wow.
And there was you couldn't see the sun, but everything went totally dark, and it was really emotional, but it was cloudy. It's interesting.
Exactly.
And the next one that will happen in Mexico, it will cross Mexico, the country in the north, is on the 8th of April of 2024. So you're welcome, because we're going to set like everything that's part of the artwork of the 5th of April.
Great.
Everybody's welcome.
So I think we have time for one more question, and I think Annick.
Yeah, I have a question about time, because time is dealt with in very different ways in your works. Rohini, you go through the human time, which is the memory, what the people did, and the memory you're emerging. And Ali, I know you also targeted the issue of human times through Hourglass, and how it is very much embedded into gravity. And so, just can you reflect, both of us, of your relation to time in relation to your work, which is also spanning somehow more than human time?
Ali, I think you should briefly introduce your piece to the audience so that they understand better what you do with
I can show quickly the still. Yeah, we can. Can we have where is this goes? Someone help me, please, because I don't have the glasses. Well, in 2014, I did a project with Naum about in zero gravity. It was called Matters of Gravity, and it was addressing the concept of gravity as the concept of gravity. That is one of the questions of today in physics, because we don't know what causes that force. We know what effects it has on the time-space curvature and how massa behaves, but not really, sorry, not really the what is it and how, but we have like a whole history of how we approach gravity, and gravity was what gives us time on how we perceive how we perceive time, because we perceive it because the sun seems to go around the earth, but actually the earth goes around the sun, you know? And we measure, the first ways to measure time was tracking the movements of the celestial bodies, and then tracking how water or sand falls, or the shadow of the shadow of the sun. No, so it's always related to time until the atomic clocks and the digital world started. So I took a sand clock to zero gravity, and what happens is that before zero gravity, when you go from 1 to 2 gravities, no, time passes faster. And then when it goes to zero gravity, it stops flowing, but it is not like a pause when you put a pause in a video. It's dynamic. So the pause is some way a kind of a dynamic way to see time. And then it flows again, no, when you come back. So for me, it's time. I believe it's embedded in us. It's a way to how we conceive time is how we behave in space. So also the more diversity of conceptions of time we have, the more something else in space.
Well, thank you. I like also when you said in Mexico, you said that time doesn't know what to do in microgravity.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rohini, did you want to
just
add?
Briefly, that was a great question also, because I feel like for me, it's both this interest in deep time, which is the night sky, but also the daytime sky. So a current project I'm doing, and I've just spent a week at the observatory in Jungfrau Joch, is looking at cloud and aerosol interaction and how the lifetime of a cloud is actually so brief. And I think meteorology and astronomy are two really interesting ways to look at the sky, only because one is deep time science, the other is really fluid and very dynamic. Yeah.
Well, thank you for such an enlightening panel.
Thank you.
Pleasure to listen
thank
to
you
you.
for
So
listening,
thank you very
everybody.
much.